Dream of sharing your message on stages, but are still terrified you'll mess it up? Want to crush your online videos so that you can grow your business, but you feel super awkward and hate the sound of your voice? Or maybe you simply want to feel more confident in the boardroom without reading your notes and fumbling over your words? Hello, new friend, and welcome to the Speaking and Storytelling Podcast, a show for Christ-led entrepreneurs and leaders who want to make a humongous impact in the world. I'm so glad you're here. I'm your host, Emanuela, a stage actress and playwright turned speaking coach and story consultant. Whether you want to master speaking on stages, online, in the boardroom, or the classroom, if you believe you're meant to make an impact in the world and you know your voice and story is the ticket to get you there, then this podcast is for you, my friend. Over the past 4 years, I've helped dozens of entrepreneurs find and tell their stories, speak with authority, and captivate their audience so that they can grow their visibility, further their God-given mission, and change the world. If you're ready to do that too, then sit back, grab a pen and paper, and enjoy the show. Hello, Speaking and Storytelling Mastery Facebook group. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's live training. Now, before we jump into today's training, which is Guest to Impress, how to captivate other people's audiences when you podcast guest, I want to tell you we're doing something fun today. I am recording the podcast while I'm doing the live. So for you out there, those of you who love productivity hacks, who love saving time, who say you can't work on your business because you don't have a lot of time, well, this, my friend, is a great way to hack the time thing, right? To cross off 2 things off your list. So when you are in this group, I may be doing this from time to time, you are going to get access to those podcast recordings ahead of time before other people, but I will be recording them and sharing them at a later date on the podcast. So you get first access. Isn't that exciting? Drop me a 1 if you are someone who wants to guest on podcasts. Maybe you already have done some podcasts and you were like, that was so much fun. I want to keep doing it. Or you've never done it and you want to start doing it. Drop a 1 because today we are going to talk about podcast guesting. Now, eventually I will talk about podcast hosting, but I am still new in that field. So once I've got some tips for you, I will drop them. Don't you worry. Now, I do want to say, podcast guesting, why do we want to do it? And why do we want to do it well? We live in a beautiful time, okay? Back in the day, you had to physically go to speaking events. You had to really work to get on a radio show or a TV show, and all that stuff is really great PR, great media. But podcasts are everywhere. And podcasts, I don't know anybody that doesn't listen to them. They're great because you can take them with you, like I said, on the go. You don't have to be a part of a social media app, right? Or a networking community. Sorry, this hair is bugging me. All right, let's do that. They are really a great way to grow your visibility without a lot of time. Now, yes, you're going to have time to maybe meet with the host and then record the episode, of course. But then after that, it's like, it's on them. It's hands off. You may have to share it, and we're going to talk about that. But what it does is it opens you up to a whole new audience. So you might be on here really like struggling, hustling, posting content, sending the DMs, trying to get those leads. And you could just go on a podcast and boom, you have all of their listeners now know who you are. I can't tell you how many people, influencers, authors, speakers, coaches that I have found through listening to my regular podcasts. And then I will hear what their guest is saying. And I'm like, I want to know more. I have to go follow them. And I search them out on Instagram and I follow along. Sometimes I even just go straight and buy the book they're talking about or download the course. Seriously, it has happened to me. Drop a 2 if that has happened to you. If you have heard somebody talk on a podcast and you're like, I love this person, and you're in right away. So that is why I think if you are especially a coach, an author, a speaker, honestly, any kind of entrepreneur, it is great. It is awesome for your visibility. And this is something that I help my clients with. I help them to master their story and then figure out where they should be pitching it. Okay. What audiences? Because you're not just going to go on any old podcast, right? And I did that in the beginning. Anybody that asked me, I was like, yeah, I'll be on a podcast. Yeah, I'll be on a podcast. And it's not a bad thing. There might be a few people in their audience that relate to what you're talking about, but you really want to curate. If you are actively going out there and searching for podcasts to speak on, you want to make sure that you are curating it to people who are your potential clients or who might identify with that pocket. I will give you an example for me. So I am a speaking coach and I work mostly with Christ-led entrepreneurs, or at least mission-driven entrepreneurs. Now, I might go on for those of you, that I'm Catholic, I might go on a Catholic podcast and they might not really be geared to entrepreneurs. So I have to get creative and think, how can I tell my story to their specific audience, which is still people that I work with? Maybe there are some people on there who just happen to be entrepreneurs, right? How can I use my story to relate to them and then also let it be valuable for me and my business? Does that make sense? I hope so. Now, what makes me qualified to talk about this? I'm not a podcaster expert at the moment. I just launched mine this week. I have spoken on several podcasts, but I listen to a ton. And as a speaking coach, I'm always listening to people's voices. And I'm always listening to how they deliver their story. And I'm listening to how the sound is on these podcasts. And it doesn't matter if it's a political podcast, a religious podcast, a personal development podcast, a book podcast. I have listened to all kinds of podcasts, mom podcasts. Like I've run the gamut of all kinds of different podcasts. There are some basic things that every guest should do to be more captivating, more entertaining, and ultimately memorable enough that that person's going to go, oh yeah, I want to go follow her. Oh yeah, I remember that she was on that podcast. Now I'm going to go look her up. That is the goal. It should be. So we're going to get to that on having a goal. Okay, there is a caveat to this before I jump in with my kind of tips for you to write down. The host is very important, okay? Unfortunately, you can only bring so much to the table, but really the host or hostess is leading the way. I actually had to turn off 2 podcasts today because one, the sound was awful. It sounded like they were driving far, far, far away and like echoing or in a cave. And then the other one, the host and the guest were both pretty monotone. They didn't bring a lot of energy to the table. Yeah, I started that and then I did this. Now, I've said this before. You don't have to be me. You don't have to be outgoing. I certainly don't have to be me. Please don't be me. You don't have to be like flamboyant and extroverted and outgoing. You don't have to sing. You don't have to put anything on. But even people who are more quiet, more reserved, you can still be very engaging with levels in your voice. And the same thing was true for the host, who I would think has hosted many times and maybe should bring a little more oomph to the table. You know what I mean? At one point, one of them made a joke and my friend, it was so awkward. They both were like, Like, when you feel that uncomfortableness because there's such an awkward moment. And this was just a podcast. It wasn't even a live. I wasn't even watching them. And I felt uncomfortable listening to their uncomfortable laugh. I digress. The host or hostess does have a big role in the speed, the tempo, the atmosphere, the feeling of the overall show and the overall episode. But if you're a really great guest, you can bring it and you can lift that up too. So don't be discouraged if you're like, oh, they were horrible. I have been in interviews where they totally threw me a curveball, where they didn't really answer and engage with what I said. So I would say something, I would answer their question, and then they would just jump to the next question. And it felt very jarring. So there are going to be some bad hosts out there. I'm just going to leave this on the table. You can only do so much. Don't beat yourself up if you didn't have a very good experience, right? Maybe they were having a bad day. Maybe that's just their vibe. But if you do your work, it will still be memorable. The first thing you need to do if you want to be a guest to impress. I left a little cliffhanger there for you while I sipped my coffee. You want to do your research. This goes back to what I was saying before. If somebody reaches out to you and says, hey, I would love you to speak on my podcast, or even in my Facebook group or at my upcoming event, you want to make sure it's worth your time. You want to make sure, again, like it's your people, it's the right fit. And then if it is, or if you're like, oh my gosh, I love this podcast, I would love to do this, then what do you love about it? Really get to know their podcast. Listen to at least a few episodes. If it's a new podcast, get on a phone call with them. Get to know them. Get to know what their mission is. Okay, so step 1 is do your research. Know what you're walking into. Number 2 is know your story. It doesn't matter what show you're going on. I can almost guarantee that the first question will be, tell us about yourself. Introduce yourself. Let our audience know what you do. I mentioned this the other day, but if you can't even get through your story without umming and ahhing all over the place, my friend, you need to just write it down. And again, I help my clients with this because not everything is going to work in one podcast that's going to work in a different one based on the audience. Like I said, if I'm going on a secular entrepreneurial podcast, it's going to be a lot different than if I go on a specifically Christian podcast. Because I'm going to bring my faith into it a little bit more. I'm going to talk about my journey coming back to my faith. In a secular podcast, I'm really going to focus more on speaking and storytelling. Both of these are true. Both of these are me and my story, but I'm going to tweak them a little bit for that audience. So this is where the research comes in. Know the podcast and then know your story. Please. You may not know any of the questions. Now, it is helpful if you can get a few questions or talk to the host, say like, what do you want this podcast episode to be about? Like, are you going to talk to me more about, for me, it would be like my play? Are we going to talk more about my business? Are we going to talk about more faith? Like what area? And sometimes they will pre-give you questions. Now, beautiful thing happens when you go off script, when you go off those questions, but those questions are always nice, like starting points. So if you can get a few questions and know your answers, and I don't mean memorize a line, I mean write down your ideas. It's really going to help. So know exactly your 5-minute story. Number 3 is, what is your objective? If you have been a client of mine, you know I talk about this a lot. What do you want your audience to feel and do? This is your why. You may have a why of like, I want to go on that podcast because I really enjoy conversation. Like, this is me. I have to say, sometimes I'm just in it because I love it. I love talking to people. But as an entrepreneur or someone who wants to grow in their speaking skills, then I encourage you to have a why. Do you want them to feel inspired? Do you want them to feel excited? Do you want them to feel motivated? Do you want them to feel ready? Do you want them to now act? What do you want them to do? Come follow you on Instagram, buy your book, have some objectives to your talk. Number 4 is to be gracious, be courteous to the host. I like to start when I first come on a podcast to say thank you. Thank you so much for having you. I love what you do here, especially blank. Have a nice compliment for the hostess on what they're building, what they're creating. Or maybe even like, I love that episode where you talked about blank. And be genuine. Don't just make it up. That should go without saying, right? Okay, so we have research, know your 5-minute story, your objective, be courteous. All right, now these are the same rules that apply in regular speaking settings. So your own Facebook Live, your own podcast, your own in-person event. These are just some general speaking rules that aren't specific to podcast guesting, but are going to help you be a more impressive, captivating guest. Okay, these are all the same rules that I talk about. Warm up, get your energy up, get your energy right. Like I said, that podcast today, the title was so enticing and I just couldn't because they both were like, just their energy was flatlined. Again, you don't have to be this like, wah-ha-ha person. I don't want you to put anything on, but you can have low energy or not low energy. You can be less flamboyant, less theatrical than perhaps me, but still be entertaining with your voice because your voice has levels. It goes up and it goes down. We talk about pace and tone, but your energy is that thing behind the words that you're bringing to the table. If you are not excited to be on that podcast, then why are you wasting anybody's time? So if you feel nervous before the podcast, you're going to want to do some exercise. You're going to want to get your body going. Moving the body helps flow the nerves. That is my very non-medical way of saying it. Gets the blood flowing, gets the heart rate moving. And remember, I've talked about this in a lot of trainings that the physiological symptoms to excitement are similar to the physiological symptoms to nerves. So psych yourself up, get excited, warm up, try to avoid filler words. Speak in that resonant tone, which if you are a client of mine, you will learn how to find your resonant tone. And that way you're speaking in a voice that not only is captivating for your listeners, but also is safe. You're not speaking down here in your chest and you're not up here in your head and you're not in your nose. All right. So those are just general speaking tips that if you do that, you get your body right. You get your energy right, you ground, you work on your voice, try to avoid filler words. All that is really, really going to help. Now, the next one is to really listen. Even if you already know the questions that your host is going to ask you, it's lovely when some new things come to the surface because you've shared something and now the host is kind of taking it in a different direction. And a great host will add their opinion. They will top what you said. They'll be like, yes, and that happened to me once with this. And then you can take that and go here. And that's how a beautiful, organic conversation unfolds. I have been interviewed where the host just asked the question, great. Asked the question, great. I'm like, oh boy. Those are not fun and they're not entertaining. It's when this organic, natural conversation starts to flow. I was recently on Sheila's podcast, so I will share that when it launches, but we had a beautiful conversation and it kind of took some different directions. The next thing is to be a great podcast guest, you have to do some work too, which means share it to your people. Because if your host sees that you are giving, they're going to want to have you back. They're going to want to share your episode with more people. They might even revive it and have a throwback episode. Every time I go on someone else's podcast, I ask for an audio, even if it's just a clip. I share their episode on my feed. I let my audience know. So we are win-winning here. My people are getting an introduction to them. Their people are getting an introduction to me. Community over competition. Next, this is the last tip, okay? If you've been writing them down, I will review them. Don't you worry. The last one is, if you can, try to include humor. If Lisa was here, Lisa Olson, she's fabulous at this. I'm not like a stand-up comedian by any means. I don't just have jokes in my back pocket. I'm not like quick and witty sometimes. But you can even laugh at yourself, right? You can even say something funny that happened to you that day. You can just laugh. If you can laugh and get the host to laugh and keep it light, even if you're talking about really serious things, of course, right? There's some very serious topics, some very serious podcasts. But again, it's about dynamic. I don't know if you guys ever watched soap operas back in the day, or even the news. Let's take the news, take soap operas out of it. We were listening to the news on our radio last night during dinner, which we never do, but my son likes to play with the radio thing, and it ended up on some local station, and he laughed because he said, first they're like, 3 people were shot yesterday, and then they're like, and the Jays are about to win in the playoffs, and their voice went from like 3 people are shot to, and tonight in the playoffs. It was that range of emotion that keeps people listening, that keeps us engaged. So if you're like always, oh, we are on this cancer podcast and we are talking about cancer. Cancer's not a laughing matter, right? It's not something that people joke about. Can you find some levity? Can you find like a story about that journey? I'm totally like winging it here, but let's pretend you are on a podcast to share your journey with cancer. Can you find those moments that you can share that can lighten the mood? We don't want the mood of the podcast to be serious information the whole time. Right? We're not in school. And I don't know if you remember being in school. Maybe some of you are in school. But the subjects that I ended up loving were because of the teacher. Because the teacher didn't open a textbook. They were just passionate about what they were talking about. And that passion got downloaded onto me. I have always hated history, found it boring because I had the worst history teacher in high school. He would just write the tiniest little notes and literally spoke in a monotone and just read the notes on the blackboard. And in 1777, the United States of America was founded. And then I would fall asleep. So in my mind now, I'm like, history's boring because that was how the information was presented. So if you are passionate about what you do, make it interesting, use highs, use lows. Please try to find some humor in life because we are all stressed out enough. Life is stressful enough. Podcast can honestly be a beautiful escape from the world. And I know that deep down, I truly believe that all of you are funny here. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should have like a comedy night, open mic comedy night. Get those comedians out here. I just love comedy. So let's review. If you want to be a guest to impress on a podcast, these are the things you're going to want to do. Number 1, research. Number 2, know your 5-minute story. If you need access to that training, we're going to do a little workshop called the 5-minute story workshop. Drop a story in the comments. Know your objective. What do you want them to do? What do you want them to feel? Why? Number 4, be gracious and courteous. Even that could be an opportunity for laughter. Number 5, all the same rules apply as regular speaking. Warm up, get yourself in a good space, voice, filler words, all those things. Number 6 is listen. Be a good listener. I think I didn't go into this enough, but when you're really listening to the other person, you're going to speak from the heart. like I said, sometimes if the conversation goes off in a different direction, that's okay. That's beautiful. That means you're both listening to each other. You're not just like, we stick to this and this only. And give the other person space to speak. This is something I had to learn because I come from a family of interrupters and loud talkers, our Italian boisterous family. And I really have to consciously say, be quiet and listen. Don't go, because that's going to pick up on the mic, especially if it's a video. It's going to flash to you. Very distracting. Just let them speak and listen. Number 7 is share it. Share the episode with your people. Share that you're going to be speaking, right? Promote them so that they're excited to promote you. And number 8 is try to include some humor. Laugh. Keep it light. Don't take yourself so seriously, my friends. We are here to be a light. Be a light in the world. As speakers, as coaches, I know you are all very mission-driven, heart-centered, Christ-led. Bring some joy to what you do. Don't worry about the nerves. The nerves will go away once you start talking. Bring that passion to the table. And if you need help with this, if you're like, I have passion, but when I talk, it doesn't come out that way, then that's where I come in. I can help you get out of your head and into your body. If you're on the podcast, you can't see, but I'm doing some flailing arms with my hand. My arms are flailing about because our voice lives in our body. I currently have spots open for one-on-one coaching. If you want to get working now, the one-on-one coaching I have available will walk us through all of this, essentially finding and crafting your story, mastering the delivery of it, and also using it in different speeches. Again, if you have a few different topics you speak on, how can we put your story into those areas? How can we find other stories to use? If we're going to work on your voice, you will get access to all of my trainings on voice and delivery and presence and mindset. And then the last piece is our visibility. Where are we going to go pitch this? What podcasts do we want to talk on? How do we get all of this content organized so we can actually have a business and keep going and keep sharing our voices easily and effectively and strategically and efficiently? And I'm going to stress easily because I don't like complicated things. This is why I still don't have a website, because I keep it simple. But it's been working for me so far. All right, friends, if you want to learn more about one-on-one with me, send me a DM and we can chat. We can get on a phone call or we can just chat there. And you can ask me any questions you have about it. All right? I take only so many clients, obviously. So if you're interested, I would jump in now before there is no more availability until the fall. All right. God bless you. Have a beautiful, beautiful rest of your day, and drop any questions down in the comments that you have about podcasting. But go out there, share your voice, get on those podcasts. It's so good for visibility. You're going to love it. And it's a lot of fun. I'm just going to check the comments before I sign off to see if there's any questions. Yes, you do need to improvise. That's why inside of the CSA, we have improv night. I think we should do another improv night because those are really fun. Getting better at speaking on our feet. Thank you, ladies, for being here. And let me know what your biggest takeaway was. Have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Bye. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the Speaking and Storytelling Podcast. Now, I'd love to hear your voice. What's one thing you learned from today's episode? How did it inspire you? And how will you take action today? You can let me know by leaving a review or visit me on Instagram at emanuela.hall. My friend, remember that you were born for such a time as this. So get out there and fearlessly share your unique God-given voice, because it just might be the thing that changes the world.